What's going on, guys? The title of this video is Don't Show Off, Don't Settle, Just Build. And it's titled that because these are two huge mistakes that men make, in particular in their 20s, and they cause you to hold yourself back and end up stuck in a life path that you're really not fulfilled on. They end up being these mistakes, whether they be financial or relationship wise, that end up putting you in a life you don't want to live and end up holding you back for years where you're playing catch up and wishing you had done things differently. So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to break down each one of these two mistakes and why you need to just focus on building yourself in your 20s. So the first thing is don't show off in your 20s in particular. For most of you out there, you're not even going to reach a place in your life where it would be practical for you to start flexing and showing off and having a bunch of expensive things in your life until at best your late 20s. And the big issue with this, and this is something I struggle with, which is why I'm making this video. The big issue with this is that if you want to live a life maxed experience where you have control over your life, you have options, you get to build a life on your terms, which is really what life maxing is all about at the end of the day. You have to have a certain amount of things set up so that basically you can escape all of the things that are naturally pulling you down into the bullshit. What do I mean by that? So like bills are a great example of this, right? If you're living paycheck to paycheck, one little thing wipes you out, right? You get a flat tire and now it's like $200 out the door for a new tire. And now suddenly you're stressed about bills. There's a saying that goes, a rocket uses 90% of its fuel leaving Earth's orbit. And really achieving great success is very similar to this when it comes to your finances. It's like there's all these things that are pulling you down, which you could equate to the gravity of Earth pulling a rocket back down to Earth. There's the bills and expenses and unexpected things that are gonna come up. There's your tax bill at the end of the year that hits you as a business owner that you didn't see coming, and now you owe 30 grand to the IRS or something like that, and suddenly that's this big expense pulling you back down. But eventually you reach a point where you can escape Earth's orbit, or in this case, you can escape the gravitational pull of poverty, sucking you back down to a really shit quality of life. And that requires you to get to a point where you have a certain amount of skills so that you can earn more income and that you have enough money already set aside. You have to have the income coming in, the skills to produce that and to continue creating more income. And then you need to have enough money so that you're not in a really stressful situation. And once you put those three things in place, it's very hard to not do well financially. It's like if you have $1 million and you get a 6% return on that, that's $60,000 a year. Like you could sit back and do nothing and make 60 grand at that point. Like it's going to be hard for you to go flat broke at that point. You'd have to be a real idiot to go broke at that point. But when you're starting out in your life, in your 20s in particular, you probably don't have $1 million. 99.999% of men are not going to have $1 million in their 20s. And because of this, if you start showing off early, you're going to pay for this later. And you're going to pay for this in a number of ways. One, you're going to pay for it in the fact that you're constantly stressed financially. And two, you're going to pay for it in the fact that it's going to limit your ability to get what you actually want. And so I'll give you an example of this for me right now. Like I live a pretty frugal life, to be honest. And, you know, my apartment costs me $1,300 and change for a 2-bed apartment. My car bill is $417 a month. I drive a Honda Accord, and you know, I do decently well for myself financially. I could get better stuff. Like sometimes I'm very tempted to go out and buy the Audi S5 or the Mercedes C-Class AMG or some shit like that. And I'm like motivated to do this. And I look at it, I'm like going to double or even triple my car bill at times to do this kind of stuff. And I just have to remind myself, I'm like, this isn't the time for this, right? Another $800 out the door for a car. And it's not even the car I really want. It's like a half version of what I want. You know what I'm saying? It's not like the C-Class AMG Mercedes is not the thing I want. I want the Ferrari or something like that. You know what I mean? And so you start doing these things where you're trying to show off, basically. Like I'll feel this need to buy a house or something like that. Let me sink 50 grand into a down payment on a house, and now I've got a $2,800 a month mortgage payment versus my $1,400 a month apartment bill. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, you feel this impulse to do this kind of stuff in your 20s in particular because you want some sense of validation, and you want that cheap dopamine almost that you get from feeling like you made progress. And so you'll start trying to show off and play this keeping up with the Joneses game, and it's this huge trap because if you're doing all this stuff, you never actually put aside the money to really escape, right? Grant Cardone used to talk about this. He said that when he was starting out, he just like stored all his money, lived super frugally, and to the point where he could just start buying investment properties. And that's how he built his wealth. And he says all the things he has now, the Ferraris, the Rolexes, all that kind of shit, the private jet, it's built off passive income that he gets from his investment properties and his portfolio that he's growing. And that's kind of what you want to think about here. It doesn't have to be through real estate, but you need to set yourself up in a point where these expenses and where showing off is not a paycheck to paycheck thing, where showing off is like way below your actual income, right? I mean, I'll give you another example. I lived with my parents much longer than I really needed to and ideally would have liked to. But it was because I knew it was like at the time, if I spent $1,400 a month on rent, then I was going to be in this spot where I was living paycheck to paycheck and I couldn't continue to invest in my business. And because I stayed home and lived with my parents an extra amount of time, I was able to invest in camera equipment and do these kinds of things for the content business. I was able to, invest in my real estate business. I didn't have to go get some 9 to 5 job that immediately paid the bills because I was stressed financially. I could allow my real estate business to grow slowly and play it smart there and save that money because I didn't have this huge expense overhead that was costing me all my money and putting me in a stressful situation. And so it's really important in your 20s to resist that urge to start showing off before it's time. Right? You're going to feel that impulse. You're going to want that car to validate you. You're going to want that, watch or that expensive thing, whatever it is to validate you. It might even be small things like an apartment where you want that thing to validate your existence pretty much. And you have to understand that showing off before it's time is one of the most dangerous things you can do as a man because it basically caps your potential. There are so many people out there right now that you wouldn't believe who, they're making less money than me, but you would think they're making 5 times as much money as me because they've got, the $80,000 truck and they've got some nice, SUV they're driving too. They've got, all these other expenses. They've got an expensive watch on. They've got some crazy mortgage that's like $3,800 a month or some shit like that. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like all these expenses and these people are drowning in debt. And you'll be like, damn, is this person just killing me right now? And it's like, they're not really killing you. They're trying to look like they're killing you. But you got to understand, like the guy who grinds in silence, who doesn't show off, and then one day you look up and that guy's just blowing everybody out. This is the experience, I talk about all the time on the channel, those 2 charts, the chart that I show with the 2 lines, the blue line being the outlier male path, the red line being the normal life path. And it always looks like the guy on the outlier life path is losing for a while. And then suddenly he just takes off past the normal life path. And eventually what happens if you do this right, if you weren't trying to show off, if you were smart and disciplined and didn't give in to that impulse to try and validate yourself to people that you don't even like, is you're going to get to a point where your success is something they can't touch, right? Like it's very hard to fake a Ferrari. It's very hard to fake a $10 million house, right? Like if you're a rapper, you can fake those kinds of things and like be living paycheck to paycheck. But for the average person out there, they can fake a luxury crossover, right? They can fake a Range Rover. They can fake a Mercedes. They can fake a really nice house that's like 800 grand or something like that. But you get to a point where your success becomes unfakeable. And that's where you want to get to. You don't want to try and look like you're on the same level as the person who's never going to get what you actually want, right? You don't need to. This applies to also everything. It also applies to dating, right? A guy will want to cash out. This is another thing I struggle with sometimes. It's like you'll have options with attractive women and you'll choose to cash out, but it's not exactly what you really want. And you're more doing it to try and like maybe fill some inner thing within you where you feel like you really want this. And then you're also in this sort of way trying to do it to validate something to other people and feel like, yes, I'm not this weirdo who's single, because there's still kind of this stigma around that in a lot of circles around being single and like, why does this guy not have a girlfriend? Which I think is totally dumb. But it is a thing, and it will motivate you to start trying to show off. Like, look at me, I've got an attractive girlfriend now, when maybe it's just not time for that. In fact, it probably isn't time for that. And it's so important to understand the compound effect. And this is why it's also so important to not show off in your 20s, is that if you can front load all of the work and you can front load all of the investment, it takes off. It compounds in a way that it won't later on in life. I mean, we've shown, like, these charts get talked about all the time with, like, if you invest in a 401k at like 18 years old, you don't have to invest nearly as much to be really financially successful by the time you're 65, as opposed to somebody who's like 35, 40 and starts investing into a 401k, because you get that benefit of compounding over time. And so I tell you guys, this goes into stay single and boring and all that kind of stuff, is like, just focus on building yourself right now. Save all the showing off for later. You need to do that work right now that is going to compound over the rest of your life and set you up with this extraordinary life that you can live. Another thing that happens that also ties into this idea of showing off is settling. And the reason for this is, a lot of times the thing that you're trying to show off with is actually something you're settling with. For most of you guys, if you're like me, you have a lot of ambition, and you're going to find that on your path to success in life, you are going to be offered opportunities to have a half version of what you really want in a much easier fashion. So I'll go back to the real estate example. For me, it's like I could buy a house right now, but it's not really the house I want. But there's this part of me that's like, oh, that would be nice, right? And then even with my real estate career, I talked about this in the last video, how, like, it would be pretty practical that I could make 20 to 30 grand a month as a real estate agent for probably the rest of my life. If I just keep doing what I'm doing, I'll be fine. I'm not going to be a failure at that point. And that becomes kind of tempting because it's a very clear path. I know what to do. I just keep doing that, and I can kind of chill and make this money. But the thing is, like, I know that's a settling move. And I know that's not really what I want. That's not really going to get me where I want, but it's tempting because it's right there in front of me. And you're going to find that these things happen to you. Again, I mentioned it with dating. It's the same thing for that too. It's like there's this impulse within me and within a lot of guys where you start seeing like a decently attractive girl show you interest, and you're like ready to settle for it. When in reality, that's not the girl you've really been thinking about your entire life. It's just she's decently attractive and you're kind of over it with the grind. And so you start thinking about settling for these kinds of things. But this is a real problem, because I do believe it's been said before, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And this applies to settling. Essentially, you need to understand that everything in life is on a 1 to 10 scale, right? There's a 10 out of 10 body, there's a 5 out of 10 body, there's a 1 out of 10 body, there's a 10 out of 10 woman, a 5 out of 10 woman, a 1 out of 10 woman, there's a 10 out of 10 income, a 5 out of 10 income, a 1 out of 10 income. And basically, what happens is if you settle in one area, it makes it very easy to settle in others. And the reason for this is because in our minds, we kind of construct a complete life, right? When you think about a vision for your life, maybe you imagine yourself making, 6 figures right now, and you imagine along with that certain things. You imagine, a certain car you're going to drive. You imagine a certain body that maybe you have while you're making this money and driving that car. You imagine a certain woman that you're dating at this level. It's like it's all one big picture that you have here. And what happens, it's like, let's say you're trying to make 6 figures, and then suddenly you get this opportunity to make $70,000 a year, and it's way better than the 50 grand you're making right now. And you start imagining a new scenario in your life of you making 70, and you're like, oh, it really wouldn't be so bad. I could drive this kind of car, and that's better than what I've got now, even though it's not really the thing that you were thinking about. And I could get a girlfriend, even though she's not the girl you're really thinking about, but she'd do. And you can get a house, but it's not the one that you really want. And it turns into this thing where suddenly the entire standard dropped because you settled in one area. And this is a huge trap. And like I said, I fall for it because, like, when I'll think about me making, let's say, 20 to 30 grand a month as a real estate agent, I'll all of a sudden construct this entire reality in my head. I'm like, okay, I would have like this $800,000 house, and I'd have, a pretty blonde wife, and I'd have 2.2 kids, and I'd drive a fucking Mercedes, and like that would be my life. And it's like you start constructing this, and you get lost in this version of life that you're imagining, which is really just you settling, because it sounds a lot easier than actually going for what you really want. When I think about that, it's like, multi 6 figures a month. And it's like, a mansion on the lake, and it's the ability to travel, and it's a Ferrari instead of a Mercedes, and it's like a really attractive wife who's really submissive, really loyal, really traditional, and all those kinds of things, and a really powerful network of cool guys that I totally relate to. It's like all these things start coming with a different vision at a different level. And you got to understand that if you're willing to go for a 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10 quality of life in one area of life, suddenly you'll do that in every area. You'll just start being okay with less for yourself. And this is a huge trap. And it's like, guys, you're in your 20s. Why are you thinking about settling? I just don't think guys understand just how much time they have in their lives. It's like you need to understand simultaneously that life is pretty long, but it's also something you need to have a lot of intensity for. It's like you need to be sprinting like it's a 100-meter dash, but also understand it's a marathon and keep both of those weird dichotomies in your head pretty much and be able to understand, okay, like I'm 24, like I got plenty of fucking time here, but I also need to hurry the fuck up. Like you need to have both of those kinds of things in your head. And so like, why are we settling? Just keep going. And I always talk about this, like, this is really part of the life maxing ethos is like, you've got this one life and it's like, what the fuck else are you going to do with it? Like, are you really fulfilled watching TV? Are you really fulfilled sitting on your phone? So like, why are we settling to begin with? You know what I'm saying? What else are you going to do? And that kind of comes down to it for me. Because like I said, with the real estate, it's like, I know what to do for that. And it really wouldn't be that hard for me to make this kind of money and just chill and sit back and, start investing in stocks and real estate. And like, I would be financially set, you know what I'm saying? And like, I could go down that path, but I really sit back. I'm like, okay, what the fuck else would I do? Like, I'd be bored if I did that, honestly. And it's so like, you need to figure out what actually you want to live for rather than what you want to settle for. And I think that's a good like mindset to have is like, you're literally going to have to do something with this life. Are you going to waste it sitting around or are you just going to go for something big? So essentially what you need to do when it comes to settling is, because I'm going to hear this from a lot of guys. They're going to say something like, it's not about material possessions. And you'll hear this kind of like bullshit from guys all the time. And I'm not telling you that your entire objective of life is you have to get filthy fucking rich. Like what I want you guys to do is figure out what matters to you and just don't settle on that. You know what I'm saying? And there's like a level of you need to be content and grateful for the life that you have and then just take action because it's exciting. Because again, what the fuck else are you going to do with your life? I literally have, I've really focused and I want you guys to do the same. I have really intentionally tried to design a life that is exactly what I want to live on a day-to-day basis. And so I always think about it, even when things get difficult for me, I'm like, there's nothing I'd rather be doing. There's nothing I'd rather be doing than training. There's nothing I'd rather be doing than boxing. There's nothing I'd rather be doing than working on a business. There's nothing I'd rather be doing than creating content. So why am I settling on that vision? Why am I complaining about this? So like, set your life up in such a way where you are getting closer and closer to that exact thing you want to do, and then just keep building towards the next thing within it and remind yourself that you're already doing what you want to do anyways, and now you're just moving towards the next version of it. And so this ties into why you just need to be building in your 20s. There is no reason to be showing off because you can't really get what you really want most of the time in your 20s anyways, and there's no reason to settle because if you settle, it's like, what else are you going to do with your life anyways? So you might as well just keep your standards high and keep moving forward. And eventually you'll get there because it's just time and consistency. And most people just don't have the discipline to stick with things for long enough to see them through. So don't settle on your vision and don't start trying to cash out right now. Just keep focusing on building your life, get clear on what your ideal life looks like, and just start building that.